Hey everybody, so in this video we are going to look at how to make either or decisions using if statements in Python. And in order to do that, we're going to introduce the else structure. Okay, so if you remember our last video, we were looking at, say, there was a couple examples with entering a number from the keyboard and deciding whether that was a big number or whether it was a small number, and that was an either or choice that we were making. And we did it with two if statements, but a better way to do that would be using an else structure. So I'm just going to copy that code into the window here, so we can just take a look at how it would be with the else structure. Okay. So what happens is, okay, we have our typical if statement here, okay, and if that comparison is true, then it will do whatever's inside that if. But if the comparison is false, we may want to do something else, and that's where this else comes in. It kind of makes sense. It's using the word else, right? So basically, it's making a choice. The comparison is true, do what's in the if. If the comparison is false, then do what's in the else. And that's pretty straightforward to kind of understand, right? So in this example, if I enter a number that was 50, it should print out, oh, that's not a big number because my comparison was false. But if I had the 150, then yeah, that wow is a big number because the comparison was true. So it's just making a choice, right? So instead of using multiple if statements, we can use this kind of if else structure, and it just makes it kind of easier to see what's going on, right? A really good example of that would be kind of using if else statements to decide on the biggest of three numbers that were entered from the keyboard. So because that's the choice that has to make. Right, you can kind of create some type of logic structure that will figure out what the biggest number is. So let's just get the numbers from the keyboard in there. All right, and I could do this with any amount of numbers, but the logic gets really, really complicated if it's bigger than 3. Oops. Ran my program by mistake. Okay, so 3 numbers, let's call them A, B, and C. Okay, and we need to figure out kind of the logic on how to figure out which one of these was the biggest number. So let's start with, like, there's only a certain amount of possibilities. So if A was bigger than or equal to B, okay, let's start there. Okay, so if A is bigger than or equal to B, then A is the biggest if A is bigger than C. Okay, so you can have if statements inside if statements too. Okay, so if A is bigger than or equal to C, then the biggest number is A. Okay, because A is bigger than both B and C. Okay. Otherwise, okay, if A is bigger than B but C is bigger than A, that means C would have been the biggest number. Okay. All right, so that's what would happen if A is bigger than B. Those are the only two options that could exist. All right. But if A wasn't bigger than B, then we can check if, so that means B was bigger, right? So if B is bigger than C, that would mean that B is the biggest number. Okay. But if B wasn't bigger than C, so what do we have? We have B bigger than A, C bigger than B, so that means C is the biggest number there as well. Okay. So biggest is equal to C. All right, so we can kind of use this either or structure with else statements instead of just a whole bunch of ifs to kind of make a little bit of a logic code, right? And so then we can just print out the biggest number. So biggest equals our biggest value. Okay, And I guess we could test that program. And I mean, if you really wanted to test this, you'd have to test all the different kind of permutations here. So let's see, if we put them in order, 1, 2, 3, it should tell me the biggest is 3. If we put it in reverse order, it would be good to test that. 3, 2, 1, biggest is 3. All right. Try to mix up the order. So 1, 3, 2. All right. All right. So trying to get through all the different possibilities. So 2, 3, 1. Okay. Still finding my biggest number. And again, I could go through all the different possibilities and check, right? But there's nothing wrong with using these if-else statements instead of just a whole bunch of collections of ifs. Okay? This is a better structure to use. And it's also a common structure to use when we want to give the user a choice between several different options. So kind of like a menu in a program. Okay? So what you could do is you could have, say you wanted to give the user a choice to do one of 3 things. Okay? So we would say maybe like enter 1 for option 1. Okay? And enter 2 for option 2, enter 3 for option 3, and then your program just decides to do whatever it is it wants to do for those 3 options. So enter 3 for option 3. And then I've got to get their choice. So make your choice. Oops. Okay. So just it's going to print my little menu on the screen there, and then it's going to ask the user to pick like options 1, 2, or 3. And then it will do something accordingly. So we could use like if-else structures for that as well. Okay? So you could say like if choice is 1, okay, I'm just going to use a print statement so you're like doing option number 1, right? But if it wasn't option number 1, okay, we could then check option number 2. So if choice equals 2, okay, then we could print doing option number 2. Okay, and if it wasn't option 1 and it wasn't option 2, okay, then we would be print doing option number 3. Okay. The only problem with this might be, well, what would happen if they entered 4? Okay. Because if they entered number 4, then this would also be executed because it's not 1, it's not 2. It would automatically assume that it's doing option number 3. Okay. So although this kind of works, it's probably not the best way to do it. So what we would normally do is we use what's called an elif structure. Okay. So instead of kind of organizing it like this with an if else if statement, elif stands for else if. Okay. What we would do is something like this. elif choice equals 2. Okay. Then we could do whatever our code is for option number 2. And then if it's not 1, it's not 2, so we can make a collection of elif statements here. Okay, so if choice equals 3, do option number 3. Remember, you can put as much code as you want in the elif statement, just like in the if. Right? And then you could finally have an else at the end, okay? And maybe you want to print, so if they didn't pick 1, 2, or 3, you could just say like invalid choice, or something like that. Okay, and when we do loops in the next lesson, then we could get this to continuously ask them to have valid choices, so it doesn't just stop your program if you did something bad. Okay, so it gives you a little menu, lets you choose. So if I do option 2, right, it's picking option 2. Right. Option 3, it's doing option 3, and if I entered some other option, it tells me it's an invalid choice. Okay, so this elif structure is really good when you have a menu of choices or a whole bunch of different choices that you need to have the computer decide which one it wants to do, instead of like kind of a nested if-else structure inside the program.